the idols, they never satisfied. They never satisfied.
Well, good morning. How you doing today? Exciting day in God's house. Hey, my name's TJ. If we've never met before, I'm the pastor here at the Shore. And if it's your first or second time with us, we have a gift for you. We'd love to give it to you. It's at guest services in the lobby to your right-hand side over here. And like the announcement said, right out the back is our family lobby. So there's a television so that if you feel like, you know what, my kids need a little extra attention, right there, you got it, okay? You can go ahead out there. There's a comfortable couch. I mean, don't get too comfortable. You know what I'm saying? Okay, whatever. All right, so today we are in this series called Gods at War. We've been basing it on the book by Kyle Ottoman, Gods at War. And someone came to me after first service and said, I bought the book, and I'm telling you, there is so much more in the book than you're covering in the messages. I'm like, oh, I know. I read the book too, and I can't get it all in. It's so deep, so rich. So I encourage you, pick up the book so that you can grow spiritually. We've also been doing small groups based around this, and this series has been incredible. It really has, because it's teaching us how to have a different perspective, how to see things in a different light. Because so many times we think, oh, I just need to have more discipline in this area of my life, or I need to say no to that area of my life, and it's all from a fleshly or physical side that we need to get better and more disciplined. But what we've been learning in this series is that there's another element to this. There's a new perspective to this, that there's actually things out there that are drawing my heart in. And they may not be real gods. They may be just false things. It may be our stuff or an attitude or a person or whatever, but they're detracting us from the one true God. And so our eyes have been opened. Our perspective has changed. And that's why in the book of Proverbs, our theme verse for this series, Solomon writes this: guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. We need to be careful what our heart attaches to. We need to be careful what we let into our heart, because that will determine the destiny that we actually begin to live out. And our destiny in life is determined by those things, those gods, whether it's a true God or anything else. Our destiny is determined by those things that we allow in. And so throughout this series, we've been talking about this. And today, we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about a very specific subject. We're going to talk about the subject of pleasure and these false gods that live in the temple of pleasure. You guys get the wordplay we got going on here? The temple of pleasure, and there's different gods that live there. Here's the three things that are going to frame our message today, okay? The first one is food, the next one is sex, and the next one is entertainment. So parents, this is what we're talking about today. And so I want to let you know in advance that this is what we're talking about today, all right? And we have excellent age-appropriate things happening in another space. Does everybody get what I'm saying here? Okay, good. So today we're going to cover adult topics, and in there they're going to have kid topics that are friendly to children, not this, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, good. Everybody's on the same page. Are you guys nervous now? It's like really quiet in here. Pastor talking about sex. That's good. That's wonderful. You just wait. It's going to get awesome up in here. Here's the deal. All of these things can be used for bad, but I'm telling you right now, these three things, they're good. Got one amen in the house. That's good. Food. Don't tell me food isn't good. God created us with the ability to taste, to have all of these sensors in us, and then he made food taste good. He could have made food taste like garbage, but he didn't. He gave it to us to enjoy. So food it's good, but if you take a good thing and you worship it as God, it's a bad thing, isn't it? Or sex is good. There's some people in here that know the truth. Everybody else, you're probably doing it wrong. I'm telling you, if that does not excite you, it's good. Entertainment. Why would God even give us the ability to laugh if he didn't want us to use it? Why would he have us be enthralled by the thrill of competition on the sports field if he didn't expect us to enjoy that? Why would we be wrapped up in stories and things like that? Why would God even tell stories if he didn't create them for us to enjoy? So all of these things are good in the right context. But when you take this good thing and you make it your God, it becomes a bad thing. And that's what we want to talk about today. And if you think about it, each one of these are present in our life. Each one of these things it's kind of an across-the-board thing. And so to kind of continue this message, to frame it out, I want you to go with me to ancient Israel. The kingdom of Israel is divided into two nations, the northern kingdom and the southern. And there's a king in the northern kingdom. His name is Ahab, and he married a woman named Jezebel. Have you ever heard the name Jezebel before? It's a name that we still use to this day that is synonymous with an immoral or corrupt woman, right? And she is the one that set the standard of immorality and corruption in her life. And that is where we get the name to this day. And so she has come in, she's the queen, to marry to Ahab the king, and she has brought in the worship of a false god named Baal. And although Baal was already present, she has tried to ramp up the efforts to worship Baal and Baal alone and eradicate the true God from the nation of Israel. And so in this time, there's a prophet around. His name is Elijah. And Elijah confronts the king, and he delivers a message. Now, and it says this, "Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, 'As surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word.'" Now, I want you to pay special attention to the way he words this, because he is very intentional to describe which God he is serving. Because at this time frame, the Israelites, they're being tempted and tested in multiple different areas. Baal is a god, there's Asherah, there's multiple gods. And he says, I want you to be clear. I want you to know that surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, the one, and he makes it very, very clear. Out of all the gods, this is my God. And he says this message: there will not be rain. It's going to be dry. Now, to put a little context on this, is that the god Baal, the false god that they were worshiping, his thing was weather. His thing was rain and sun and at the right time and so that they could have their crops and so that they could feed their livestock. And so this was a very kind of agrarian society. And so they relied on the weather for their livelihood. And God was pouring out blessing and blessing them completely. Their crops were growing, their livestock stocks were strong at this time. And they kept saying, "Thank you, Baal, for the blessing." And God going, "Wait a minute, that was my blessing that I gave you." And they kept worshiping Baal as God, but really they should have been worshiping God the entire time. So God says, "Okay, you want to worship Baal as God and thank him for the blessing? I'll retract my blessing from you and go ahead, worship him and see what happens." And I don't think God has changed, and I think that still happens in our life today. Maybe it's not rain, maybe it's not crops, but in our money-obsessed culture, have we had some financial issues in the last 10 years? In our food-obsessed culture, have you noticed the fight over food recently? Whether this is healthy or that's healthy, or and that's a GMO and that's not a GMO, and I need to go on that diet, and the system's failing. Did anybody notice that? When it comes to our sexuality, is there dysfunction sexuality in our culture right now? And we worship that, don't we? We're drawn to that. Entertainment. We're the most entertained generation in the history of the planet. And constantly we're saying, "I'm bored. There's nothing on TV. There's nothing good out there," right? Do you ever hear that? It drives me nuts when my kids come to me, "Dad, I'm bored." I'm like, "Go find a stick or something. Make up a game." Like, don't look to me. Entertain yourself, right? And that's us. We have all these things, all these blessings, and when we worship the blessing itself, we miss God in the process. And so God's saying, well, if you think Baal brings the rain, see if he brings the rain. And for 3 years, it doesn't rain. And the creeks dry up, and the wells are dry. The cisterns where they would store the water have now been emptied. And Elijah comes back to Ahab 3 years later, and they have this kind of showdown on Mount Carmel. And I want to just give you the beginning part of this. It says this: "So Ahab summoned all the people of Israel and the prophets to Mount Carmel." Now that's the prophets of God, which really was only Elijah, and the prophets of Baal, which there were 450. And then Elijah stood in front of them and he said, "How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." It's not unlike the challenge that we heard last week from Joshua, where Joshua said, "Choose this day who you will serve. Is it God Or is it this one, or this one, or this one? He says, you've got to make a choice. You can't ride the fence on this. And Elijah stands up before the people. After 3 years of drought, after 3 years of Baal not coming through, of the starvation and the hunger and the thirst that comes along with that, he stands up and he says, you've got to choose. And the people were completely silent. That's astounding, isn't it? To think that after 3 years, they kind of go, we don't know. We want to ride the fence. We want to see who's going to come through. I don't think that's unlike our culture. I mean, I want the blessing of God, but I also want to do things my way. I want God to bless my life, but I also like this other stuff and other things. I've been guilty of that in my life. How about you? Sorry, to be honest with you. It is church, right? I think we've been there. I think our culture's been there. I think our churches have been there, that there are times where we want God and all that he has to offer. We want the blessing, but we don't actually do what he's asking us to do. And we sit in the middle. We want it both ways. And God's saying, man, we have to choose. Just like Elijah said, we have to choose. So let's go to this God of pleasure, this temple of pleasure, and talk about these three things a little bit more in depth. Number one, it is the God of food. The God of food. $110 billion. Do you know what that number represents? The amount of money Americans spend on fast food every year. 110 billion. I don't even know what that looks like. Can you guys fathom $110 billion? That's like silly numbers at that point, right? You're like $1 million, I could kind of grasp that. I've driven by $1 million house, 2 million, 10 million. But we are way past that. $110 billion. It's a big industry. It's bigger than books, magazines, newspapers, movies combined. Did you hear that? Books, magazines, newspapers, movies combined. Oh, and music too. You throw music in there, it doesn't push it over the top. That is an insane number, isn't it? Is it safe to say that our nation is kind of obsessed with food? Yes, but here's the deal. It's not just about what we're eating. Sometimes our obsession is about what we're not eating. Like we live to count the calories. Or we live to work it off. Like we eat whatever we want and then we work out like 6 hours a day, right? I don't know if you know people like that. Not one of them, all right? I don't know if you could tell. Maybe profile will help you out a little bit. I'm not one of them. I'm probably struggling on the other side, what I shouldn't be eating, but it tastes so good, man. Like you say waffle fry, I'm like, where are we gonna meet? You know, it's like what do they put in that stuff, man? Pure peanut oil, that's it. Go Chick-fil-A, that Christian chicken. It's good. It tastes wonderful, but it can't be my all-consuming. I can't just eat, right? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I just did you a disfavor. Chick-fil-A's closed today. And now you all want it, and you're gonna get a chicken biscuit tomorrow morning. That pastor, he set me up. But isn't it true? Like we are obsessed with food. Whether we eat it or not, we're still obsessed with it. We're thinking about what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat. And how I ate this, so now I can't eat that. Or I ate this, and now I have to work it off, or I have to do all these things, or I have this meal, or that meal, or this diet plan, or this. See, all of this is an obsession. Whether you're glorifying food or vilifying food, either way, you're still obsessed with it, aren't you? But who should we be worshiping instead of food? God. Jesus talks about this. He's preaching a sermon. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. You may have heard of it. It's in Matthew chapter 5. And so he begins to teach this message. He has this message. And he goes long. Like he starts early in the day, and he's preaching, and it's well into the afternoon, and into the evening, and it's beginning, the sun is beginning to set, and the disciples say, hey, Jesus, this is a remote area. There's not a lot of time. Can you send the people away so that they can get some food, because they're hungry. They're really hungry. And Jesus says to the disciples, well, why don't you feed them? And they're going, well, we really didn't plan to feed 5,000 men, women, and children on top of that. We didn't put that in the agenda today. I'm sorry, Jesus. And he goes, well, what do you have? He says, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish. And so Jesus says, that'll do. And he breaks the bread, and he prays over it, and multiplies it. 5,000 men are fed, plus women and children on top of that. So maybe 15,000 people are fed at one time. And that night, the people go home or camp out or whatever else. And Jesus and his disciples move on to another region. But the next morning, the people that ate that bread, what happened? They were hungry again, right? So they wake up and they find out where Jesus is, and that group of people chases Jesus down and says, "Hey, Jesus, that bread was so good. We're hungry again. Well, we need something to eat. Well, you gave us food last time, so kind of like a stray dog. You feed them, right? At one time, and they keep following you around. The people are like, "Hey, Jesus, we really like that bread. Can you give it to us?" And his response is in John chapter 6. He says, "I'm the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." What's Jesus doing here? The people were after something physical, and he turns their attention to something spiritual. And he's teaching them that your physical hunger, once you satisfy it, will always come back. But if you come to me and you find your source, your pleasure in God himself, you can be fully and finally satisfied. Food could never do that for you. And he begins teaching this lesson. In the book of Psalms, it tells us this: "Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him." Taste and see that the Lord is good. If we're struggling with food, we need to find a different source. Because you can drown your sorrows in a quart of ice cream, but when you get to the bottom, you're feeling worse, aren't you? It didn't satisfy. It didn't help you. So what should we do? Should we do it anyway? No. It's not working. So we need to find a source that is greater, which is, of course, God. What he has for us. That he can fully and finally satisfy. That we can go to him. And he's the one that will help us never thirst, never hunger again. We'll find great joy in that. All right, number 2. You got a sex. The moment you've been waiting for. But let me be clear, once again, that these things are not bad. You're going to be tempted to walk out of here and go, I can't eat. That's bad. Can't have sex. That's bad. Can't be entertained. That's bad. That's not what I'm saying. All of these things are good. They're gifts from God. But if you take the gift and you make it a god, then it is bad. You can't live for the food. You can't live for the sex. That's just a gift from God. And any gift, we should recognize that it's a gift, and we should celebrate the giver of the gift, not the gift itself. And so that's why Kyle Ottoman in his book, he continues. I want to read a quote to you here. "When something good becomes a god, the pleasure it brings dies in the process." When something good becomes a god, the pleasure it brings dies in the process. Think about that. When I live for the pleasure of that activity or that next bite or anything else, eventually that thing will no longer satisfy, and I cannot get pleasure out of it anymore. It's broken. If I go to the source again and again and again, eventually it will not bring pleasure to my life. Pleasure has this unique trait. The more intensely you chase it, the less likely you are to catch it. Because when we treat that gift as a god, it cannot satisfy. It will always run empty. And that's what Kyle Ottoman is trying to say here. And I think it's running true in our life. So an example, I've got, about 6 months ago, my wife and I, somebody sent us a box of chocolates. How many like chocolate in here? Cool. My wife was the loudest one. That's great. And they weren't just any chocolates. They were salted caramels. Anybody like those? And they were from a specialty chocolatier in Northern California. And they had all these exotic salts from around the world. They were the expensive kind that they had like a piece of paper printed with all the ingredients and where they were from. And there was like the pink salt of the Himalayas and this one and this salt from this place. There's one that was sriracha infused. Come on. Spicy and sweet and salty all in one. Come on, that's awesome, isn't it? And so we open this box and you take that first bite, and it is just, man, it's euphoric. You know what I'm talking about? You ever have a good piece of chocolate like that? You're like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing in the world. This is what heaven's gonna be like the entire time, right? Like, oh, so good. Oh, that was delicious. And you're like, well, there's all these other flavors. What do? You got to keep going, right? And so you grab another one, and you take a bite, and it is good. It tastes wonderful. You're still enjoying the rhythm of the feeling of that moment. And number 3 is still good, but it's not as good as the first one, right? Because now you're chasing it. Number 4, number 5, and dozen, somewhere in there, right? You lose it. Because you're chasing the pleasure, and eventually you get used to it. You ever been there before? I remember when my wife and I first met each other, the first time we held hands, it was like electricity through your body. Anybody ever remember that part of your life? Like you held hands, your heart's beating a little bit. You're like, oh, it's really happening, right? Like, yeah. Anybody else go there? Nobody. I'm the only guy in the room that's like, I see a couple ladies. Oh, it's so wonderful. The guy's like, no, not me. I'm too tough for that. All right, okay, fine, whatever. And then, but after a while, is holding hands enough to get your heart going? No, there's got to be a little more, and then a little more, and eventually, you know what I'm saying? Are you ever satisfied? Can that pleasure of that first moment be continued through everything else, or do you have to keep going further and further to find that same feeling? You see, if you seek pleasure for pleasure's sake, eventually it will run out, and it'll run out quicker than you think. And when it comes to sexuality, man, that is a long road, a painful road, and a dark road that you don't want to go down. But many of us, and I'd say, in fact, probably most of us, have gone down that road, and it's taken us places we didn't want to go, that decades ago we would have said, I would never do that. But the pleasure kept calling and calling and calling. And that God kept pulling on the strings of your heart and pulling you away from Jesus and pulling you in a direction you never wanted to go. You see, when you make a gift a God, it becomes a tyrant in your life and keeps calling you deeper and deeper, and it's hard to tell it no, isn't it? Whether that's food or sex or anything else. That's why in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes this, and he talks about the physical versus the spiritual side. See, we think when it comes to these things, well, I'll just go on a diet and I'll be better. Or I'll just have more self-discipline, or I'll say no more often, or I'll just get better. And I'll say no, and then it'll be okay. But I don't know about you, every time I try to say no, it's a really hard no, isn't it? To say no to the desire for pleasure, to say no to the desire for those things. So Paul tells us it's not against the flesh that we're fighting. He says that there's something spiritual going on too, that there's a God pulling at your heart. So here's what he writes. For though we walk in the flesh, we're humans, we have a fleshly body, we're not waging war according to the flesh. So we don't fight according to the flesh, like our bodies. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power. Divine power. There's a spiritual side. There's a godly side at work that we can fight in the godly side, and we can resist the false gods that pull on our heart. We need to have that divine power at work within us. If we're going to say no, it's going to be because of God working in us. And those divine powers to destroy strongholds, the things going on in our life. The passage continues, and he says, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. And look at this. This is the big point. Take every thought captive to obey Christ. Take every thought captive. Because if you can capture the thought that is leading you towards the idol of a gift, you can make it obedient to Christ, you can dismiss it right there. So when the thought comes in, you know what, you should have another cheeseburger. Okay, let's say, Jesus, do I need another cheeseburger right now? You probably didn't need the first one. Okay, see you later, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Should I say this? Should I go there? Should I do that? You take every thought captive and you go, Jesus, spiritually speaking, is this the direction you have for me? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? We take that thought captive and we submit it to God. You want to start winning the war in your life against false gods? Start submitting your thoughts to God. Start asking him, is this it? Is this what, or do we just sometimes blindly choose? I'll just do what feels good. That's what the world tells us, right? Do what feels natural. Do all these things. Or do we submit it to God and go, God, I know that you have a divine destiny for my life. Is this a part of it? And if we listen, I believe that he'll speak to us in this. So we've the God of food, the God of sex, and the God of entertainment. Now, this one is big for me because I sometimes on Sundays worship at the church of the first down. The touchdown and the last minute field goal. That's a church. We raise our hands and we yell, right? And if you guys don't know anything about sports, you're like, what is he talking about, right? Like, it's like the church of the Gators. That's us, right? Woo, go Gators, baby. That's it. But isn't it funny how that elicits a response? Yes, I like that church, right? Like, that's good. But sometimes it detracts us from the real church, doesn't it? Ouch, well, that sucks. Yeah, it does. And if you're not a football person, maybe it's the church of the big screen, or the church of the Academy Awards, or the church of the new music Tuesday, or the backstage pass, or the church of the new like on Facebook, or the follow on Twitter, or whatever your social media on, you're on now, whatever, right? Like those things are addictive, aren't they? Just to see another game, just to see another at-bat, just to see another movie or a television show, and again, nothing wrong with any of these things as long as these gifts are not God's in our life. But there's somewhere, at some point, these things can become God's when we spend more time and energy going to them and worshiping them and wanting to know more about them than we do spending with our God. Paul writes to a young pastor, his name is Timothy. And Timothy was growing in his ability to lead, and Paul was writing on how to lead a church. Timothy's in charge of a church. And the book of 1 Timothy is that letter that he wrote towards Timothy. Paul wrote to Timothy, and this is what it says. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God. So he's telling them, there's a false god that wants to pull on their heart. It's money. And that thing will pull them away from the one true God. So he says, don't set your sights on something that's unreliable, but set your sights on something that is completely reliable. Now, notice, he doesn't say money is bad, right? He says having money is fine, as long as money doesn't have you, as long as it's not your God. So set your sights on God, the true God, and everything else is fine. But if we get off of the track from the true God, that's when things get in trouble. And then he goes on to say this. So set your sights on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. So all the things that God has given you is for us to enjoy. It's actually a gift. And that gift, we should look to God and go, thank you. Thank you for giving me the ability to taste this wonderful piece of chocolate. To have sex in the right context and in a way that honors you. To be entertained and to laugh and love. And it's fine to have any one of those things in the right context. Does that make sense? God actually wants you to enjoy life. I don't know if you've been to a church where they try to teach you that everything's boring and terrible all the time, but God actually did all these things for our enjoyment, but we got to make sure that we are not, absolutely not, taking the gift and making it a God. Because when we start to worship the gift, we become empty and lonely and broken people. And you've traveled down that road before. I turned 35 this week, so I have a whole lot of life experience, right? And that was kind of a joke, kind of not. Because some of you guys are like, oh, dude, that guy's old. And other people are like, oh, you could be my grandson, right? Okay, so we're stuck here in the middle. But here's the deal. I've lived long enough to know that I can chase any pleasure and it will not satisfy me. And C.S. Lewis talks about this. He says this, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If there's something that I'm desiring that food, sex, entertainment, or anything else can't fully and finally satisfy, I wasn't made for the things of this world, but I was made for the things of heaven. I was made for a relationship with him because he's the one that can fully and finally satisfy me, and you. Kyle Adelman in his book picks this up. He says, you were made for God, and until he is our greatest pleasure, all the other pleasures of this life will lead to emptiness. We can chase and chase and chase. And listen, I've done it. You've done it too. It was like, is it health? Is it food? Is it relationships? Is it sexual intimacy? Is it entertainment? Is it any of these things? We've all chased and chased and chased and chased. But until God is what we're chasing the most, we're going to end up right here at the bottom. Our life will lead to emptiness. I want to show you the difference between a gift from God and then worshiping that thing as God. Just real quick. So we have a gift from God or worship as God. So if we have a gift from God, it leads to a connection. But if we worship that thing as God, it actually leads us to loneliness. So let me get back to that quart of ice cream, right? Okay, so like if you eat a little bit of ice cream and you go, man, God, that was good. Thank you for giving me the ability to enjoy that and whatever else. We kind of have a relationship with God. We're connected with him. We're talking with him. We're saying thank you to him. We're growing a relationship with him. But if you dive to the bottom of that thing and try to drown your sorrows in Ben and Jerry's, at the end of that ice cream, when it's all gone, are you going to feel happy or lonely? Right? We kind of go all in on this thing that can never satisfy. Another thing is, if it's a gift from God, we'll actually find pleasure in it. But if we worship as a God, it's going to lead us to emptiness. When I say, God, this is a gift from you, and I'm thanking you, the giver, and not worshiping the gift, I will actually feel pleasure. I'll enjoy it more. But if I chase and chase and chase and chase, it'll actually lead me to emptiness. The next one, there's satisfaction or demand slavery. Have you ever noticed that there's a moment when you're in a right relationship with God, when you're loving God, when you're saying thank you to him, when he's doing all these things in your life, there's this moment where you can actually be satisfied with life. You don't need to watch the next season on Netflix, or you don't need to have another dozen bites or chocolates or whatever else. You don't need to have any of those things. You actually get to a point where you're like, man, life's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But when we worship those things as God, we actually find ourselves in a point of slavery where it's never good enough. Never good enough. Have you ever found yourself chasing something and you never seem satisfied with it? Maybe it's a career, maybe it's food, maybe it's finances, maybe it's your personal health. There's a moment where we can be finally satisfied. Not perfect, but we can go, God, thanks. This is awesome. There's also, if we treat it as a God, it doesn't give you pleasure. It's a tyrant. It drives you, demands more. Another one is intimacy versus separation. A gift from God will give you intimacy, but if you're using it as God, it's separation. And then the last one is unity or divorce. A gift from God will bring unity into your life. You'll have greater relationships. But if you use it as anything, as a God, your relationships will crumble in the process because you will use people to get things. And that slavery of that demand, that false God, will actually pull you apart from people. So the question for all of us, are we treating all of this pleasure, all these things as a gift from God, or are we worshiping him as a God? I'm telling you today, right now, if we could turn our attention from the gift to the giver, it would change your perspective. And you would find more joy in your life than you ever thought possible. Because the things of this earth cannot fully and finally satisfy you. It is just not possible. You were created for something different. So we need to lift our eyes and go, God, what are you saying to me? What do I need to do in my relationship with you to grow? To find pleasure and joy in you and what you've given. So it's like a parent. Many of you in here are probably parents. It's like you get that gift for your kid, the one that they've really been waiting for. It's Christmas or their birthday or something, and you give that gift to them. And they're so overjoyed, and they're just going, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, all that stuff. And they run in their room, and they set up the gaming system or the dollhouse or whatever it is. And it comes dinner time, and you're like, hey, come on in here. Just a minute. Okay, seriously, come on. Okay, I'll be there soon. The next day, you get home from school. All right, do your homework. No, I got to do this thing first with my new toy, and I'm going to play, and blah, blah. Right? And they start neglecting their responsibilities, and see, sometimes we do that with God. We say, God, thanks for the gift, but I don't really need you anymore. I've got the gift. But eventually that gift will turn on you, won't it? And it'll begin to take life more than it gives life. So this morning, here's what I'd like to do with all of you. I'd like to take a moment to pray. And prayer is just talking to God. But I want you to communicate with him about what it is that you in particular are walking with. Like maybe you've never started a relationship with God, so all you've known are the pleasures of this world, and you know that they're falling short. You know they're not working, and you're going, well, I don't even know what to do next. Well, God, start a relationship with God. That's what's next. Or maybe you have started a relationship with God, but these other things are kind of pulling on your heart. They're kind of detracting you from God himself. Listen, you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to walk alone. We got great people in this church. We got small groups. We got great coaching. We got great things going on. Don't do it alone, but also hand it to God. Take captive every thought. And that's what we're going to do. So if you don't mind, maybe no one moving around, you can close your eyes, bow your heads if you want to have just a moment of quiet and peace so you're not distracted. We're going to pray. We're going to talk to God. We're going to pray about this. We're going to say, God, I give you my life. Maybe for you, it's the first time you've said that. Maybe first time in a really long time. We're going to pray, God, help me to know there's other things pulling on my heart. And when I recognize them as false gods, I'll begin to find freedom when I submit to you. I submit them to you. Let's pray this prayer together. God, this morning I pray that you would forgive me, because I've done things my own way. They haven't been submitted to you. And they've led me to brokenness and emptiness and loneliness. But today I give my everything to you. For the first time in a really long time, I'm re-upping my commitment to you, God. And I pray that as things begin to pull on my heart, try to pull me away from you, that I would recognize what's happening, that it's just a false God. And that I would treat every gift as it is, a gift, not a God, just a gift. And I would say thank you. Thank you for the gift. That pray that my life would celebrate the giver and not the gifts. Thank you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Everybody says, amen.
Thank you for taking the time to view our sermon. Our goal is to spread God's word and to share his good news with you. At the end of our message, we offered a prayer. If this was the first time you prayed that prayer or the first time in a long time, we would love to know so we can pray specifically for you and with you. Please drop us a line at hello@theshorechurch.com. We won't spam you or inbox you or add you to a mailing list, but we would love to send you a 21-day reading plan. Thanks again for watching our message here. We would love to see you in person on Sunday morning.